Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Frontier, where we explore the edge of innovation in American single malt whiskey. Here on the show, we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. Usually we talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations that we get to have along the way, and we get to talking about a little bit of everything. I'm your host, Doug, or as I'm known around the internet, Demi Tastes. I'm joined today, as usual, by my co-host, Phil of the Rangers Respite. And after a month of hiatus from having producer interviews, we are joined today by Nate Randall, co-founder of Hinterhaus Distilling. Welcome, Nate. How are you?
I'm great. Yeah, just made it home just in time to jump on here, so it's good. And thank you for having me on here.
It's great to have you. The year has really flown by. I first met you in February, I think, at ACSA in Denver. It doesn't feel like February. It feels like March or something. It feels like this year's been really short. And you were one of the producers that I was like, we have to have you on the podcast right away. Right away didn't quite happen. It was like 2 months later. And by then you were sold out of products that I would want to talk about or that people could actually buy. So we said, hey, let's just delay it for 6 months. So here we are. And we have today the brand new batch 3 of the it's Discovery is the title of the product, right?
Correct. Yep.
So the Hinterhaus American single malt whiskey called Discovery. This is batch 3. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And we have, as a contrast, the unfortunately sold out, if I understand correctly, batch 2. So we'll be able to see a little bit of evolution in the product. We will get into those later. But there's a lot of ground to cover first about the distillery and the other products. And first of all, I want to offer some kudos. You've been named Rising Star by the Craft Distilling Institute, I believe.
Yeah,
Rising Star Distiller.
Yeah, which is amazing and a total shock. And also, I'm in my late 40s, and it feels kind of funny to be a rising star. That sounds like a young man's game or a woman's game. And so, yeah, but totally amazing surprise. And, really just, I think, hopefully a reflection of the hard work that everyone on the team puts in. Sometimes the head distiller gets a lot of the recognition when most of the work is done by other people, and certainly that's the case with us. It's very much a team effort. So, yeah, really, really cool thing.
And taking it back to ACSA one more time, also kudos on the many awards that you got, including one of the best in show, not best in show. One of the it was the Innovation Award for Warming Hut, which is a really interesting spirit that I quite enjoyed.
Yeah, that was another one that kind of knocked us off our chairs. It's such a cool industry, so many cool people doing great things, and there's so much room for innovation and experimentation. Really cool to be recognized for that product, which is a very unique thing that in our area anyways has been connected to the holidays, and so it's a fun thing everybody looks forward to. In fact, we're just got the labels in today and bottling it next week.
Ooh.
And so the 2024 release is coming up, and I can attest it smells and tastes great.
So I apologize to reduce your entire, portfolio and year worth of news into just those sort of 2 sound bites, but I'm sure you'll tell us a lot about everything else that's going on. But as we like to do, we like to get to know our guests on the show, not just from the geeky side, but also on the personal side. And you have quite an interesting story with lots of gaps that we might be able to sort of fill in a little bit. So as you mentioned, you are in your late 40s. Which, I would say it's from listening to interviews and sort of reading publications about y'all and how you started this distillery, which was just November 2020, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll put a pin in that and come back to that. It sounds like you're almost on your 3rd career, right? Everybody says like, hey, in a second life, I'd like to be a musician, or I'd like to be a distiller or something like that. And it seems like you're well into that, that 2nd or 3rd major phase of your career, which is super cool. Really inspiring to me on a personal note, because, I am a software engineer by trade, and this podcast is becoming a bigger and bigger part of what I spend my brain on. So
Yeah. And we were just, diving into that a little bit. We were just very fortunate to be in a situation where we could sit back and take a little bit of time to think about what we wanted our lives to look like. And, very fortunate for that. It's not lost on us that not everybody has the ability or the opportunity to do that. And so that really launched, sort of this phase of both Bonnie and I's lives and careers. And it's just an amazing, fun thing. And we've always chased sort of opportunities throughout our careers, and it just felt like a good opportunity, and so much creativity and innovation in the space.
So I guess one more thing before we sort of give you sort of a jumping off point to tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be where you are. You mentioned that you were drinking something interesting, and I was wondering if I should grab a pour. So first of all, I don't have what you're drinking, so I would like to ask, is there a particular whiskey brand that you like to drink when you're not drinking your own?
Oh man, I say this all the time because we do get this question quite a lot, especially in the tasting room or if we're out in the public doing tastings or events. And I drink very little of our stuff for pleasure, let's say. Um, Mostly I drink other people's stuff. I'm very big into Scotch and American single malt whiskey. That's one of the driving forces of why we're doing what we're doing. And so there's a long list, but I would say, anything from Stranahan's, anything from Balcones, um, anything from Cedar Ridge, anything, you could go down the list of influential people. Your McCarthy's barrel pick is phenomenal. We got
Thank you.
a couple bottle of those, and everybody agrees. I mean, the entire distillery, our son, everybody agrees. So yeah, I would say anything American single malt, support this crazy, innovative, wacky space.
All right. So I'll probably excuse myself in a moment to go grab my Stranahan's, which is just over there, because I have a Stranahan's Brewer's Cask, which seems on theme, so that feels like a good
Yes.
sort of warm up. But before I step away, I want to sort of ask. So let me first observe. Actually, let's take it back. So I've got a little bit of in a way, a personal connection to y'all. When I was speaking with Bonnie at ACSA, I realized that we've been living sort of parallel life paths. I'm just about 20 years behind. She was born in New Jersey, as was I. Lived in Texas for a while, as did I. Sort of settled in for a career in the Seattle area, which is where I'm at now, and then ultimately worked your way down to California. Now, I can't predict what the future holds for me, but it would be a real kick if I somehow ended up finding myself in California in a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been quite the journey for both of us, and we could definitely dive into that. I mean, and that's some of what has formed the way we approach life, and even this distillery and products and opportunities is just, we have been around and traveled different places and taken opportunities and taken the risks to leave where we're from or leave where we've gotten comfortable. Sometimes of our own accord, sometimes because life happens, layoffs or whatever it is. And so, yeah, that's definitely a theme of our lives.
So I'm going to sort of leave the door open to you if you'd like to talk at all about your previous career. I heard that you also used to have a podcast, anything like that, and then sort of work our way into how you ended up founding Hinterhaus in the middle of the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know how much you want to spend time on your the before times, but if you're willing to share, we'd love to hear.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to share. And just quickly, I'm having Stranahan's. Shout out to them. They do awesome stuff. We were fortunate to be welcomed into their spot a couple months ago in the Denver area. And we picked up a bottle of this experimental series that was done in tea and honey casks. So we had to taste it, and I'm revisiting it tonight. But yeah, before this thing, I was in, let's say, corporate healthcare and employee benefits for very large corporations. Bonnie worked in the wine industry and also did marketing for startups and that and PR and that sort of world. And yeah, we, through life journeys ended up in California. I was one of the first several hundred employees at a little company called Tesla Motors. When I went there, I was leaving a corporation at Safeway that have over 200,000 employees. And I was very used to the large company lifestyle and sort of the corporate thing. So to take a chance to go to an unknown startup making electric cars, which at the time were not a popular thing, it was quite a leap of faith, and obviously worked out well in the Tesla. Now everybody knows who Tesla is. You see Teslas everywhere. During the period I was there, a 4-year period, it grew from several hundred people to over 13,000. We moved into over 20 countries and opened 120 locations. And my team grew from a handful of people to over 90. So you can imagine what that experience and scaling was like. To get to how we got to an alcohol business. Again, Bonnie had familiarity with the wine industry. After 4 years at Tesla, I was learning over the last sort of 18 months that the intensity and the lifestyle was difficult and was starting to take its toll on me. We also went through some life events. My father passed away, just some different things, and a lot of things coalesced. The Bay Area, with for people who are not familiar, sort of around the San Francisco Bay Area is what I'm talking about. And we had a family cabin that we had purchased several years earlier in a couple hours east in a little town called Arnold, which is in the Sierra Mountains. So we're 4,000 foot elevation. People don't envision California this way necessarily, but tall trees, deep snow in the winter. It's a proper mountain town. And we've got our A-frame cabin here at the time, which is now our home. And we just decided that we were going to move there for a period of time. Our son went off to college, just the one son, and we wanted a little bit of change of lifestyle. So we figured we would move here and see where the world took us. And over that time is when we developed the plan to start a distillery. And we figured it would hopefully pay the bills and put food on the table and pay insurance and just the basics. I mean, there wasn't much left as far as trying to achieve things or trying to get to a certain position in life. It was more about trying to create a life that we were comfortable with. So that's how we ended up here.
All right. So since we've got some comments coming in, let's do a little roll call and what everybody's drinking. Thank you for sharing that story, by the way, Nate.
You bet.
Let's see. We've got the Whiskey Shaman, who, look out for the episode with Hinterhaus from him. Whiskey Shaman is a great podcast, and coincidentally, he just recorded with Nate as well. So that's going to be fun to listen to and see how our approaches to the interview differ.
Yeah, and what we talk about, honestly. So yeah, it'll be good.
Whiskey Shaman is drinking water tonight. Very wise. Thank you. Spicy Strawberry, welcome in. Drinking some Lost Woods ASM. We're looking to have Lost Woods on the podcast soon. Stay tuned. And Dram Dude has tasted some Hinterhaus Batch 3. So we've got some context in the chat here. So anybody in the chat who hasn't said anything yet, let us know what you're drinking. So as I said, I poured the Stranahan's. I guess I'll make my face bigger for a second. I poured the Stranahan's Colorado Brewer's Cask. So we've got this sort of connection on the brewer connection as well as the Stranahan's, which is Nate's one of Nate's. I don't want to say favorite. I don't want to put that word in your mouth, but like one of the things that Nate enjoys drinking.
So just because you're showing, this is the
honey in your tea.
Honey in your tea. Yeah. It sounded really interesting, so I had to try it.
Yeah, Stranahan's has some really interesting stuff. The first time I tasted Stranahan's, I think was an old bottling from like 2020-ish or possibly earlier that was all honey. just like all honey and a little bit of malt sugar. And I think Philip had the same one as I did. And we're like, this is really good, but I don't know what to do with it. Because after a couple of sips, you're like, yeah, that's it. And then I built a really cool cocktail around it, killed the bottle in the space of about 2 months, and said, okay, I need to get more of that. And
Yeah.
then realized they've come a long way since then. Yeah, the complexity of the flavor profile, the breadth of the portfolio. It's a really cool brand.
Yeah, it is. It's a really really neat to see the single malt space and the people who've come before us, and what they've done with it and what they've achieved and what they continue to do. And we're fortunate to see some background stuff over there, and they've just got a great program and they're laying down some really cool stuff. So
Bartlemay in the chat. Welcome in. I think Joe O'Sullivan might be listening in too, but just listening in because he's doing paperwork.
Yeah, Joe's a little old school. I didn't even know he knew how to work this kind of thing.
I send him a YouTube link by SMS, and I think somehow he ends up in. Brandon Moore says, greetings from the guys at Central Cali Bourbon Barrel. We love Hinterhaus. Cheers, Brandon.
Yes, nice.
And Brandon will be sipping that batch 3. So glad to hear it. We're really looking forward to trying it.
Yeah, Brandon and his crew came up release day, I think, and got their bottles, because as you alluded to, they do sell out pretty quickly these days, which is awesome for us. Hopefully everybody who's very interested gets to taste them and gets a bottle. That's the downside of when things sell out. You really do want everybody who wants to enjoy it to be able to try it. But yeah, Brandon and his crew are awesome people, and they've got a great group down there.
Yep. So I realized that we forgot to do self-promotion a little bit, so I'll just interject. So first of all, thank you, Nate, for calling out our single barrel release. There's information about that in the chat, including some links to other videos, so I won't belabor that point, but I will put up the video where Phil is showing off the bottle. So we've got our sticker on there, which that's our sticker now in the upper right corner. So that's the sticker on the bottle. 6 years, 6.71 years in a rum cask, no Oregon oak, very unique expression. So there's that. And what made me think of this was sort of my next question is coming from, I recently did a private tasting, and I realized there were a couple of bottles of American single malt that I brought along that were things I had acquired in my travels or as samples for the podcast, just to show people, what's out there. And they said, wow, that one's really cool. Where can I buy that? And I said, oh, I don't know if you can buy that in Washington. Right. Yeah. So I need to start doing my homework to make sure that before I say, hey, try this thing and make people love it, that they can actually get it. So I want to ask you, is there any way to get these, your products, or in particular, the American single malt, outside of visiting your distillery?
I was going to say the number one preferred way is to come, walk through our doors and get that experience. But for many of our products, we do ship. We have a third-party partner who partners with retailers in California and can ship to 41 states. So there's our core lineup is always available, which would be vodka, gin, bourbon, and cask bourbon. The single malt gets posted on there occasionally when we do releases, and typically sells out pretty fast. I do know that as we speak, I think there's one bottle left of batch 3 for California shipping. We have this weird situation where California only is separate from the rest of the states. And I believe there's around a dozen left for nationwide shipping. So it gets pretty low. We had our bottle release last weekend, and we do reserve some for the tasting room so that we have it for several weeks. But yeah, folks can try it that way, and we certainly appreciate anybody that does. I think the direct to consumer sort of method has worked well for us because it is such a limited release. We can't really afford to allocate very much to our distributors.
Okay, great. Well, glad we covered that base early, but now now I want to going very out of order today. Now I want to take it back to sort of the founding of the distillery, let's say from a technical perspective. So, first of all, um, you were well in the pandemic when you sort of opened your doors,
Yeah.
and that must have been tough from a logistics perspective. I mean, there were a lot of distilleries, small craft distilleries, your size and maybe even bigger, that didn't survive the first year and a half of the pandemic. And there you're not the only one that sort of started up in the pandemic, but it's kind of a rare story to hear getting started in under those circumstances. So I wonder if you could give us a little bit of flavor around how that came to be.
Yeah, so it wasn't in the business plan that we were going to open a distillery during a pandemic, but yeah, I mean, it just happened. And again, fortunately, our life and work experience, having moved many times, having dealt with different situations, like I alluded to, layoffs or different things, we were able to deal with it and sort of adapt. In some ways, we do think it was probably easier than folks who were already open and had to deal with a reduction in income or changing rules or whatever it was. But yeah, we were planning the distillery. We were moving forward with the distillery. We actually signed the lease on the building and the space that we were going to use, and put a deposit down on some of the equipment, which is a pretty significant thing, the week before the nationwide lockdown in March of that year. And I hate bringing people's brains back to what it was like, but that was a pretty weird time, to say the least. And so, we didn't have a choice. If it had happened, that lockdown a week earlier, before we had signed these leases and everything else, we wouldn't be here. Like, we would have definitely been like, okay, this is not meant to be right now. But we were
Hmm.
kind of in it already. But there were several interesting, looking back, uh, good things for us that came out of it. One was our permits, which, historically, or what we had heard, take a long time and can be a very difficult process with the TTB and feds and state and everything else, were approved in a matter of weeks. And what they were doing and what they said to us was, we need hand sanitizer, so make hand sanitizer. And we were like, okay, thanks for approving our permits. We don't even have equipment yet, but yeah, okay. So, there were little things like that, or, having the time to really be locked down in our house and nothing but time to think through all the details of every little thing we were going to do. Another example is our branding and our packaging. We ended up redoing the packaging because as it was getting closer to opening date in November, it was looking more and more like California still would be very restricted at distilleries. So when we opened, we weren't allowed to have anybody inside, and we couldn't taste anybody. So it's literally, my wife and business partner, Bonnie, sitting out on the sidewalk with a folding table in the cold in the mountains, selling bottles. But we ended up redoing the packaging because we knew, that people wouldn't be able to taste it. So we had to give them a reason to buy it, had to look good. And that has been a good investment too, just because it is the first thing that people touch. So there were a lot of interesting things like that, that actually benefited us, or the phased reopening. That was very helpful because we didn't know what we were getting into. We thought this would be a mom and pop shop and maybe some people would stop in, and it's not like that. It's a very busy tasting room 4 days a week that we're open. So it allowed us to kind of ramp up too, and not have a just sort of a splat when we open. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really wild that it was really just a timing of nobody could have known, but we're in it now,
Yeah.
so you gotta keep going.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad that you're here. You've clearly been making quite a splash in the industry. I mean, I hear nothing but love for you from all corners of the country.
That's very nice.
I've tasted at least a few of your product. I won't say lots. I know there's at least twice as many products that you have than I've actually tasted, but everything I've had has been at the very least interesting. And I say that as somebody who mostly drinks whiskey, right? So I usually avoid judging spirits that aren't whiskey in terms of is good or bad, but at least interesting, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the whiskey is absolutely great. In the that big tasting that they had at the 7 Grand in Denver with all the 24 American single malt producers, and out of everybody new that I had tried that night, yours stood out to me as being one of the top 3 new things I had tried, and that's why I wanted to have you on. And the little selfish thing of like, I would like to try more of your whiskey. Let's talk about the new stuff. But so is this a good time to maybe try batch 2, or should we
Yeah.
wait a little bit to get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you're pouring, I can introduce sort of what we're up to with American single malt whiskey. As you alluded to, we make a lot of products. And I will tell people who understand the industry like yourself that we almost operate as 3 distilleries. It's all one brand. It's all branded the same. But we work a lot with wine. So we have a section of our spirits that are start life as wine. So that's almost like one vertical. And then we function almost like an independent bottler or sourcer with our bourbons and ryes. And we do some fun things again with wine. We're in California, and what's your natural resource? Grapes, wine barrels, all of those things. And then the thing that really sits at the center of it and is nearest and dearest to our hearts, or at least my heart, and I know my son's heart, so the distillers' hearts, is American single malt whiskey. And that was the driving force behind forming the distillery and what we really consider our flagship and our grain to glass kind of effort. So in this series, some people will call it a series, the Discovery series. What we're doing is bringing our patrons or friends, family, folks who are interested in what we're doing on our own discovery of what the American single malt whiskey world can be for us. And so in batch 2, what you've got here, and I'm going to have to be old and put on glasses so I can read this. It's pretty fine print on the back, but in the nature of transparency, we put everything
Love
from.
this.
Thank you. Well, so we're spirits nerds and whiskey connoisseurs in the first place, so we do too. And we thought, we know this information, let's share it. So we put the maltsters, we put what the barley varieties are that are in here, we put what the cooperages are, of course the age, and how we treated the casks. So we're doing a lot of experimentation with this series, and the real point is to introduce people who might not be familiar with whiskey at a deep level, that there can be drastically different flavor profiles with just a handful of basic ingredients. You've got water, barley, yeast, barrel. There's not much going on the surface. But what we're discovering through this process is what we feel our house style will be. And we really wanted to peel back the layers, and thank you for the compliments on our spirits, the way we kind of view ourselves as more of a conduit. Hopefully, if we've done our jobs, we've stepped out of the way and let the amazing barley that Admiral makes shine through. Let the amazing barrels that Kelvin makes shine through. Let our amazing water, which we don't have to treat and we get from the source a handful of miles from the distillery, shine through. Those are really what we're trying to do, is not impact, at least with these types of products, not put our own thumbprint on it too much and step out of the way. So what we've got here is an attempt to replicate a style of single malt that I'm very partial to, a Highland sort of grain forward, not a lot of barrel influence, like maybe a Glenmorangie kind of a thing. Obviously difficult to do in where we're at. We're not going to be able to age things for 10 or 12 years with our climate, unless we had some kind of crazy temperature climate control facility. But yeah, so we've got, ex bourbon casks involved here, ex wheat whiskey casks. We finished it a little bit in our own single malt. And we've got barleys from several different varieties of barley from Admiral Maltings just down the road from us, Northern California family farms. So hopefully all of those things just shine through. And if we do our jobs well on the distilling end, we're really not impacting much. We're just stepping out of the way and trying to get a good distillation.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this everything on this label. Really, all the ingredients that go into it. When I introduce people to whiskey, I'm sort of like, well, whiskey is fermented grain distilled, and then your ingredients are thyme and wood. Beyond that, right? You've got your yeast, your barley, your still type, maybe, right? There's so much variety of flavors that we get out the other end of those seemingly simple decisions, to the point where I, as a geek, love the fact that we've got malt bills now, right? American whiskey loves their mash bills, but when you've got 100% malted barley, where do we get interesting? When we start breaking down the malt bill. Where did this come from? Or we break down the cask bill or something like that. And I think that it's not just all fluff. The more reviews I do, the more I sort of realize, like, I can tell that's this type of cask or that type of cask. And I don't know that I can tell one barley source from another necessarily. Maybe I'm working on that a little bit.
In a minute, you're going to, when you taste batch 3.
Yeah, this is a great opportunity to explore some of those choices, because even though this is the same series, they're vastly different. I won't say philosophically, but in terms of the individual choices that have been made, it's not just one change that's different. It's like everything but the distillation equipment has been changed.
Yeah. And that's kind of one of the things we're trying to do with this is, again, as sort of whiskey geeks, we wanted to share this process with people. I'd imagined that if you're going to start a distillery and you're going to make an American single malt and you want to have a flagship American single malt, the Hinterhaus single malt, that you're going to do a bunch of experimentation to get to the point where you know what your process is going to be, what barrels you're going to use, how you're going to do that. We're just sort of taking people along for the ride and pulling back the curtain and showing what we're doing through that process. We've probably gone a lot further than we needed to. We have had, batches that are in the barrel that have not been released that are like, you could say that's the one, we're going to just do that. But we want to keep experimenting. And so it's been a lot of fun. And, the stuff our son, who's the assistant distiller, Keegan, has been doing in the malted barley world is just amazing. And it's so cool. I can see this parallel between where I was at in my career before this, and doing very innovative, important things in healthcare, different industry, or landing at Tesla when I did, and the innovation that came with everything that Tesla has done. And there's a very interesting parallel to where the whiskey world is, or the spirits world is right now, between those two things. Healthcare, very outdated, needs to be disrupted, needs to be fixed. Needs to be made better. Electric cars, trying to make the planet better, trying to make a better car, doing things differently. And there's a very similar thing that can happen here. The other parallel that I hear people make all the time is craft beer, and sort of beer was in a place where all the beers on the shelves, 99% of the beers on the shelves, were owned by 2 big brands and were pretty pedestrian. I could argue that the average liquor store or grocery store is where craft beer was when it came on the scene. So I think there's just a lot of creativity and fun. And back to what Keegan is doing and is feeding into this, and what you said about tasting different barley varieties. last summer, so for the last sort of 9 months, he's been doing single grain distillations and this discovery of, what does one grain taste like before you've done anything to it, just the raw distillate versus another grain. And we've done dozens of them now. And that's been a really cool process to distinctly taste the differences, and then sort of go from there and figure out what we can do with barrels. And so we've got some fun releases coming down the road that are the only variable, with a caveat that I'll explain later, but the only variable is the grain. So the same age, the same distilling process, the same yeast, the same barrel, and we're going to do single grain releases of these things, so that theoretically, within some margin of error, the only difference you're tasting is the farm or the maltster and the way they've treated the grain.
Cool. I've got a lot of things to process for follow-ups there.
Yeah, sorry, I went on. I have a.
Oh no.
You said that I needed to talk a lot, so I'll do that.
That's what we like doing here. Okay, so let's take this back to something that sort of stuck out in my head as you were going through that. So when y'all moved to Arnold to start the distillery,
Mm-hmm.
your son had gone off to college.
Yeah.
And not to step over this point, but your son, if I understood you correctly, is now working as assistant distiller at Hinterhaus. So he's made the move along with you once he finished school.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, again, just life happens. And so when we did open our doors, on that chilly November day and nobody could come inside, again, we thought few people might stop by. There was a line across the property we're in out to the highway. Some of it, I think, was probably a sympathy vote. Like, these poor people are opening a business, during a pandemic. Fortunately, people came back. And so we realized really quickly that once we did open, or were able to open the tasting room, per the laws, that we would need some help. And, him and his now fiance were in Flagstaff, Arizona, finishing up school, as you said. And, folks will remember that nobody could get a job at that time. And especially if you were a young person with no experience coming out of college. So we said, hey, we need help, because we can see the writing on the wall here that we didn't, plan properly for how busy the tasting room is going to be. Would you guys come help us and just commit like 6 months solid, so that we can get on our feet and figure things out? And so that's what they did. And lived with us in our house for those 6 months. And then fortunately, they both not only are really, really good at it, at the various tasks that they're doing within the distillery, but they both decided to stay, and at least for a period of time, will be here making their lives and help us continue to grow the distillery. So again, not something we planned. We didn't plan to suck our kids into into working for us or anything like that, but it's worked out really nicely, and it's been great to see both of them really succeed and do great things in what they're doing. And I think I preach this all the time to any young people I meet that look like maybe they're looking for something to do. I think there's an incredible amount of opportunity in the distilling space, for folks who are motivated, innovative, excited, and interested to succeed and get some cool experiences traveling around.
Cool. It's cool how these things work out, and as long as everybody's feeling appropriately engaged and achieving what they want to achieve with their careers, the fact that you're working with family isn't so bad.
Yeah, no, and it's got definitely. I mean, the high points and the good points are, you know what to expect, and you can trust family and things like that. And especially in, in a distillery and with safety concerns and different things like that, you do want to trust your employees at a different level than you might if you're running a different kind of company. So, so there's that built into it. And yeah, it's just great to see. And I think there's so much opportunity. And, if either of them decide that they want to go learn from something somebody else is doing, we're more than all about that. They're definitely not locked into having to help us. But it's been really cool to see. And I love seeing people get opportunities and seize them. So that's just great in general.
All right, I want to pivot back to some technical details. So since we're having batch 2 right now, and we mentioned that really light Speyside light barrel influence sort of thing, I did want to call out. I'll make my video a little bigger so people can see. I have a nice light background, which is actually in some ways on purpose, because I really wanted to be able to see the color of whiskey on video if I hold it up, and you can see how a light gold color that is. And it has so much flavor to it. You would never think, I mean, I know that I personally, coming from the world of I like scotch that has no color added. I know that delicious things come in colors like these pale shades of pale,
Yeah.
But this is 19 months old.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that, I was just saying this to somebody else the other day. They were asking about why 19 months or why that age. And, the answer is it tasted as close as we thought it was going to get to what we were shooting for. We would have kept it going longer if we thought that it was going to go somewhere that we were intending it to go. But we felt like, doing what we were trying to achieve, it was ready. And one of the early on, we both really admire what Balcones has done and what Jared has done over there. And one of the early on people that we were able to meet at ACSA, the first one we went to, was Jared. And it was just so refreshing coming from a big corporate environment where maybe the people who are the influencers in the industry sometimes won't, share with other people. The distilling industry is not like that. The distilling industry is very open-armed. And I remember distinctly one of the things he said to my son and I about American single malt whiskey was, we had just distilled some of our first batches and we were like, man, we don't know how old it should get. We don't know how long to leave it, like this and that. And he said, don't worry about age. Bottle it when you think it tastes right. And, and I think if you can get past sort of the age thing and really focus in on flavor, there is some benefit to that. Now, have I tasted whiskeys in our distillery that taste young? Yeah. And I don't think we've bottled them yet. But there are people who have way better palate than me who would probably be able to taste this and tell you that they think it's young or, whatever they think. But yeah, I think it's fun. I think we were shooting for that flavor profile and it tasted like it was there. And if we let it go much longer, it might grow out of the window that we were shooting for. And then, just little things like throwing it in other American single malt whiskey barrels for a short finishing was kind of a fun thing to try out too, just to mellow it and see what's what. But we've got so much stuff going. It's crazy. We're all over the map.
So the ex-ASM cask finishing, those were all casks that were vacated by batch 1, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So not from any other distilleries or not from you don't have a single barrel American single malt program or anything like that?
No, those were all from batch 1, and batch 1 was exclusively new charred American oak. So again, trying to do what are the flavors we can achieve, and batch 1 was good in a different way. Very heavy. It had something like 7 malts in it, so we might have gone a little bit overboard with playing with the recipe, but it's all fun, and we have so much stuff laid down that's just it's going to be really interesting to see how it ages out for us. Um, and that's one of the things that, for me personally in my career, just selfishly, I've moved jobs a lot. I've within companies moved jobs a lot, because if it gets too stale and if it's too processy, I get bored really easily, and I can tell that I'm unhappy with my job. So part of setting the distillery up the way we have and the products the way we have is to intentionally not have consistency, so that we're always doing something new, and we have room within this product line to experiment. We can do whatever we want, and if somebody thinks of something interesting, whoever it is around us, we'll try it, and we'll see what's what.
Right. And you've got really good like palate sensibilities where everything that you're releasing is good. Right.
Thank
It's
you.
and also you're not releasing, I imagine that you are also not releasing anything. You've probably done experiments that didn't turn out, right?
Yeah, we've released things that are not my palate, but there's somebody's palate, and in the distillery. And a great example is some of our single barrel bourbons we do. We choose single barrels as a team, and it's a process where sometimes individuals have one that they really really like. Sometimes we all agree, but there might be one or two that we've released that I'm like, I don't know, it's okay, but somebody really loves it, and really fought for it to be released that way. The only caveat I would say not releasing things, we have a product called beer schnapps, which is distilled beer.
Right.
And it very good distillation, fun casts we've done and stuff. It doesn't always fit my palate depending on the type of beer. The hazier, hoppier beers don't work with my palate. I don't like them. I like the more malty beers. But that said, and this is the beauty of flavor and taste and smell, is somebody always finds it, if it's quality, as long as it's a quality product, there's always somebody who's it's going to appeal to them, and they're going to go, I love that. That's the coolest thing I've tasted, or that's, whatever it is. So that's one thing I've learned is the compliments are awesome. But that really, to me, is process. And we've put together a really strong process, and we're really particular about our distillations. And we try to distill in favor of the best tasting thing we can, not in favor of volumes or trying to hit numbers or whatever it is. We're very flexible in how we distill. And so hopefully that comes through in the product. It's going to be quality, hopefully. And even if it doesn't match your palate or it's not your favorite batch.
Right. Yeah. I thank you for making that distinction. I, for some reason, was having a hard time articulating that. It's whether or not it's my palate. I've strived as a reviewer to develop a sense for what is objectively quality.
Yeah.
And then, and to rate things accordingly and do tasting notes, and then to give an indication of whether I think it's to my palate as kind of a separate thing. I value that. I value doing that because not everything I like is something somebody else is going to like, and vice versa. And as somebody who likes to interview, all types of people from across the industry, being able to sort of, have that credibility to say, I can tell what you have is a quality product, and still be open to having that discussion of whether it's not for me, and have that be a positive discussion,
Yeah.
But that's exactly how I feel. Hinterhaus, everything I've tried from you has been extremely high quality. I come to expect that, and can rely on that when it comes to tasting your products. And I think that other people should be able to as well. And at the same time, everything I've had from you has been different. I didn't know a spirit could be like this, right? In the case of Warming Hut, something that didn't have a bunch of like flavors added after the fact, right? Could have that much interest in terms of flavor. Or that American Single Malt. There was a period from late 2023 to early 2024 where I kept trying things that were like, I did not know single malt could taste like that. Just pushing the boundaries. And Hinterhaus did it to me twice in one night, right? First, it was the new charred oak expression. And I'll be honest, when I sort of stepped up to the booth and it's like, batch one, it's all new charred oak, I was like, oh, another single malt in new charred oak. But it was really good. And then we tried batch two and I was blown away.
Yeah,
just completely.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of that though also is, so we do have a tight process. We are very nitpicky about the distillation and those sorts of things. But the ingredients are amazing. I mean, we work almost exclusively, caveat being next batch we're going to try here, not, but we work a lot with Admiral Maltings, and they are doing amazing things from grains grown on literal family farms. And so when you're starting with ingredients like that, that makes a huge difference. So some of it again is that stepping out of the way and letting what these people are doing in their craftsmanship of malting, growing grains, those things really shine through. I also want to mention that we talk about how much we control all these variables and try to let ingredients shine through, but then we have an 1,800-gallon open top fermenter that we open the garage doors and let the flora and fauna from outside come in and impact our fermentation. So we don't control that aspect. It's completely Mother Nature. Whatever is in the air that day could infect making for the wash, and probably does, and I'm sure does. And so seasonally, it can be different. We don't control for temperature. So, in the wintertime, it's a much colder fermentation than it is in the summertime. But that's another way that we're trying to lean into letting the place we're at shine through. Now, somebody who's very scientific will say you have no idea what's happening and why your stuff tastes the way it is, and that's true. But it's an area of almost science meets art that we're comfortable with and that we really embrace. So that's kind of a fun unknown and uncontrolled piece of the story.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that because I was tasting some rums recently, and I was tasting the Hinterhaus batch 3, and I was saying there's something about this that feels a little bit rum-like, and I
Yeah,
didn't put together that open fermentation and that sort of thing until just now. That I think that's probably what it is that sort of wild fermentation blends a
yeah,
little bit in that direction of the same sort of thing like dunder, where it's the bacteria, whatever happens to be in the muck or the dunder, that's contributing to that flavor.
yeah. And we work with a lot of breweries on various projects and products, and whether it's cask exchanges or whatever it is. And they're always a little bit shocked and offended at the way we're doing fermentations. But again, I think it's some of it is also coming at in a problem or an industry from a place where we don't have a background. So it's kind of that beginner's mindset, which is something that's, people try to capture sometimes, even if they know an industry or they know a problem. They try to approach it from that beginner's mindset. It's really handy when you truly are a beginner and you're approaching it from a beginner's mindset. So we're probably doing things, from time to time that are incredibly inefficient, or nobody would ever do, or very few people would do. But it's just because we're approaching it from a place of, I guess.
I just want to ask: is my internet glitching, or are we losing Nate occasionally? Is that Phil or the audience?
I
Is it okay?
sorry, I keep forgetting that I am muted. It does not appear to be your internet, Doug.
Okay. But as long as it's coming through, so I'm just getting short glitches, and it's been mostly fine. I just wanted to double check that I don't need to like reset or something. So, okay, cool. No worries, Nate. You're fine. I just was wondering, when I see glitches, I'm like, I might not be coming through anymore. So I'm
Yeah,
hearing you just fine, except for the occasional glitch. And, no worries.
got it. It could just be mountain internet, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, so a slight pivot now, and I think now might be a good. We've been talking about fermentation, right? The wash. Now might be a good time to sort of pivot into batch 3, where
Yeah.
the most prominent difference I've seen between batch 1, batch 2, batch 3 is that batch 3 is saying an explicit brewery collaboration. So batch 3 is in collaboration with Dust Bowl Brewing Company. How does the open top fermentation and the collaboration with another brewery work? Are they doing that, or are you bringing the wash in?
Yeah.
Is it a totally different thing?
Yeah. So we actually partner with Dust Bowl and other breweries fairly frequently to do our wash, because the scale at which we're doing it right now, we need that. So we've worked with them and others for several years now, and we're big beer fans anyways. And so obviously beer, wine, spirits, we cover all our bases. We're fans of all of it. But they have a porter that they release infrequently that's won a ton of awards, and it's just this amazing porter. And as we distilled beers over the first couple of years, the darker beers, bocks, porters, stouts, just had some really interesting qualities with all those sort of toasted grains they use. So we tasted this porter. My son said to me, "Hey, this would make a really good single malt if they just took the hops out, and brew 100% malted barley porter without the hops and no carbonation." So we talked to them about that, and they said, "Yeah, let's do it." So that's what we did here. And to pair that, we used some new charred oak, because we thought, that new char kind of American whiskey thing will probably go really well with the sort of toasted burnt grains that you find typically in a porter. Yeah. And it's been a fun one. And the really cool thing is just, again, tasting the difference between batches. And yeah, there's some significant differences to the things we've done. But again, we're down the rabbit hole. The average person who walks into a distillery, they might know that bourbon is supposed to be 51% corn. They probably think it has to be made in Kentucky.
Yep.
And so,
I get that a lot.
you start talking to people about how single malted barley can taste different, when it's presented as a whiskey, and the average person doesn't know this. And so it's really, to me, like talking about how a Zinfandel doesn't taste like a Merlot, and on down the list. And this is a very strong characterization of that on purpose, right? Going from a batch 2, which was meant to emulate a light Highland, to a batch 3 that's meant to be a dark porter influenced American whiskey. You couldn't sort of put it in front of people more easily to understand what's going on here. And Dust Bowl, the folks at Dust Bowl, again, they make amazing beer, and they're awesome partners, and we like working with them, and we like hanging out with them. So it was kind of that benefit too. Get to hang out with brewers. When they show up, they bring beer. So it's we're always reciprocating when we go to visit them. But man, that nose, I just get like heavy cream and cinnamon roll. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Right on the nose. Yeah, this one, weirdly enough, this one was like begging me to make an old fashioned out of it. Right? I'm like, yeah, I like that. This needs to go in an old fashioned right now, because there's so much like baking, just because of the season, right? There's so much like baking spice flavors in it and everything. And it's like, yes, this has actually the coolest tasting note I got from this is like, some people will say like just on any given bourbon, it tastes like oak, right? Or it tastes like corn. And frankly, I very rarely get either of those tasting notes as a distinguishing feature. Like, yeah, sure, they're in there, but like, does this really taste like oak chips? Does this really taste like corn? Very rarely, right? Similarly, single malt rarely tastes like barley.
Yeah.
But one of the tasting notes I got on this was Golden Crisp cereal.
Oh yes.
Do you
Yeah.
guys remember that?
Mm-hmm.
With like the otter or chipmunk or something that's like the
Yep.
mascot.
Yep.
And like to me, like whenever I have barley tea, it sends me back to my childhood thinking about that Golden Crisp cereal, which I think is like, I feel like not a lot of people had that cereal, or it's not very popular now, so people kind of forgot about it. But that note, that malted barley sugar note, the puffed toasted barley, right? That's all over this for me. That and
Yeah.
honey and baking spices.
Yep.
It's such a cool flavor profile, and I can't think of anything else in my collection that comes close to this.
It's wild, and it's perfect for heading into the season we're heading into. It just the flavors beg for the fall leaves and all of that sort of stuff. The other interesting thing to me, and it could be psychosomatic, because again, I've had the beer. Actually, recently they just brewed it and released it again in anticipation of this. And then they're also releasing. They've recently started a small distillery, so they're also releasing this bottle at their brewery distillery. But I get that, like right in the mid palate, I get the porter, dry, almost burnt toast kind of thing hits. And I like that. It's not barrel char to me. It's more like burnt toast and or burnt grains or something like that, in a only in a good way, because there are other good flavors to mix with it. If it were just that flavor, you'd be eating burnt toast, right? But it's got some of the sweetness and the cinnamon surrounding it. I just think it's a really fun one, again, because it's somebody else's recipe in that base beer. We did the best we could with distillation and aging and stuff, but it's as a whiskey fan, it's a fun flavor and thing to discover. And it does pair really well with a porter, if anybody's ever inclined to sort of have one in each hand. But
do like a Boilermaker.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have to say that the Public Enemy Baltic Porter, it's such a good name.
Yeah.
And it feels like, I used to go to a bar that had rotating taps from all over the country. It's very possible I've had that beer before.
Yeah, very possible. Their brewery is much larger than we are. they're one of those big regional breweries that does amazing things. Again, we're big fans of what they do in the first place, and their head brewer Don is a genius. He talks about things with regards to brewing and fermentation science and other things that I don't know what he's talking about, but I know that he knows what he's talking about. So
So what's interesting to me, all those sort of fall baking spices, I guess we're all tasting now, so I'll make our heads the same size. So all those baking spice notes, like, to me, when I taste this in isolation, so whenever I've got like a lineup of whiskeys and enough time ahead of these podcasts, I try to have them all in isolation, where it's like the only thing I'm drinking in a given evening, if I can get it, or it's the first thing I'm drinking in a given evening.
Yeah.
And then put them against each other and sort of change the order which one I have first. So with 2 whiskeys, that's very feasible, because that's 4 nights worth of trying stuff. When I have this one, batch 3, in isolation, it reads as extremely sweet.
Yeah.
And yet, and interestingly, batch 2 doesn't, right? And yet, when I put them up against each other, batch 2 is the sweeter to my palate. It's got a lot more honey. It feels like a more classic Speyside kind of sweet.
Yeah.
And this batch 3 is just something completely different, where it's got that balance of all the spices. And like you said, when you were saying toast, I started thinking there's like this multi-grain nut bread that I used to get all the time. There's probably lots of different brands that do this, where it's got a bunch of nuts in it.
Yep.
And you put that through the toaster, and it gets this sort of sweet grain flavor.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of thing that I feel like you're saying. And it sounds like it looks from the nodding like Phil completely agrees with what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Phil.
I'm personally a really big fan of dark beers. The joke that I usually use is I like beers as dark as my heart. And there is this nice, like, roasty, almost something that you get on like roast, like coffee roast, that is not got the coffee note, but that like core of like beginning to caramelize, and it just sits very nicely in the core of the palate of this, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, and it's probably it's probably a little bit crazy to do. Maybe not the most efficient thing to use all of these malts and making this, but it's really fun. People appreciate it. And for us, it's just this cool, again, back to discovery of what's out there and what can be done. And, if we're fortunate enough to own the equipment and the facility to put this stuff out, I feel like we should have fun with it, and try to do some interesting things. So it's been a cool journey so far. And we've been laying down as much American single malt as we could possibly make. We're at capacity, and we've been so for a while. And so there's a lot of cool stuff that we have planned for the future, that'll be fun and just sort of extend this thing that we're really passionate about. And we're really fortunate to be a part of this great community that's hopefully growing and being officially recognized by the feds and all that fun stuff at some point. Yeah.
Somebody said something recently. I don't actually remember where I heard this. It was probably a podcast. I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's a good thing I'm a podcast fan, because I'm a podcast and I'm adding to the cluttered opus of podcasts. Somebody said, at this point, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, of course it matters that TTB ratifies the rules, right? But at this point, American single malt is a category, right?
Yeah.
Consumers know what to expect. Producers are making it according to the same definition that a lot of them came to completely independently. It's almost a foregone conclusion. This thing makes sense.
Yep.
So yeah, there's always a link in the description, by the way, to go right to the TTB and encourage them to ratify the rules. And I encourage you to go do that now. There's also links to where to buy our barrel pick and all that other good stuff. Check out the video description. Always good stuff in there.
The one thing the official stamp of approval from the government will do is open up corporate entities to buy into what we're doing. So to get a section at Total Wine that's dedicated to American single malt, instead of just this kind of like, some of them might have an American whiskey section, maybe the single malt ends up there. Those sorts of things are really, really important. And if it, when it gets passed, hopefully soon, there will be much more engagement from the whiskey magazines, from retailers that are large, to really focus in on, yes, this category exists and it's here to stay.
Yeah.
The government doesn't do anything until they're sure it's here to stay. So that's probably part of the delay, is just making sure that this thing's happening. But it's definitely happening. There's amazing single malt being made every day, and more of it. We meet new distillers in California all the time that are opening now, and one of their main sole goals is to make American single malt whiskey. So it's definitely here, and it's really cool.
So today we've gone way out of order, but I just want to say, while we still have people's attention, you should go check out the description once again to go find hinterhausdistilling.com and other information, their Instagram. You should check them out for sure. And also, if you wouldn't mind, please like, subscribe, and share our podcast if you like what we do. We love doing this. We love sharing with you. And the best way to keep doing it is to help us grow, because, if we feel like we're talking to an empty room, then we start to wonder whether we should still keep doing this. So yeah, help us grow. It's good. whatever justification you want. It's different for us every week, frankly.
Help
What
us,
keeps us going is the one odd compliment every other week. So
help us promote this growing category of whiskey and the people who are creating it. And on that note, I am going to once again be the agent of chaos that I am and say that you should buy a postcard with an American distillery on it and write to the TTB. Just send it to their offices in DC. Just a postcard telling them that they need to ratify the new standards of identity, because as the longer they leave the barn door open, the fewer horses are going to be left.
yeah, that's a great idea. We've talked about that before, and I should go make like a blog post and put it up on Reddit and everything, because that physical letter writing campaign, we've tried everything else. It's easy to ignore digital stuff. It's not easy to ignore when hundreds of people send you thousands of postcards from distilleries that say ratify American single malt. These guys make a great one. So yeah,
Yeah,
if that
now
sounds like fun to you.
and now even American single malt, but just even more broadly now, just given where the economy is and different things, now is a very important time to support small businesses,
Mhm.
especially. And if there's a restaurant or a shop or a distillery or a brewery or a winery in your town that you appreciate, it's too late when they've gone out of business to say you loved them.
Mhm.
And so now is definitely a good time to support whoever it is you appreciate and don't want them to go away,
Yep.
because many people are struggling right now, within our industry and outside of our industry. So it's
Yep.
it's very important to sort of put your money where your mouth is, I guess, is the old saying.
Yeah, I'll one up that. I mean, I'll plus one that for sure. Uh, I recently, I think just yesterday, I was saying, I like Woodford bourbon, but there's a lot of other stuff I want to drink. So I'm not going to go out and buy a new bottle of that just to have it. I'm
Yeah.
going to go spend that money to support a craft distillery that I love, that needs the support more than the giant brand that's got every bar in America is buying their way. They don't need the support the same way the craft distilleries do. So go to your local distillery, buy their whiskey. Go to a craft distillery you love that has national distribution. Like anybody who works with Big Thirst Marketing. Um,
Yeah.
this is not a sponsored podcast, so I'm allowed to say that, right? Like the
Yeah.
nice thing about Big Thirst Marketing, who is fulfilling our McCarthy's single barrel, is that they ship to 38 states, I think.
Yeah.
So there's a good chance they ship to you. So I know that Whiskey Del Bach uses Big Thirst. Um, I I mean, Balcones is owned by Diageo now, so whoever they were using, they're not anymore. That's kind of unfortunate, but they're also not they're not craft anymore. Love Diageo, love Balcones, support them anyway. But if you've only got one bottle of whiskey to buy, go buy from a craft distillery. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
I think it's just important to remember what we like about our community, and again, whether that's distilling or something else. I've seen it one too many times where a business goes out of business and everybody jumps on some thread and talks about how much they love them, and it's like, well, they 9 times out of 10 they didn't go out of business because you loved them. They did because you didn't go there and support them. So I think it's important to support the things in our community that we care about and that make our community better. So, and hopefully we're a part of that. But if it's somebody else, then absolutely make sure to support them.
So, all right, now that we've done all of that before we completely lose people's attention, I know that we tend to run long and we say we're going to try to keep it a little bit shorter, but there are so many nerdy questions I have for Nate, and I want to kind of get back to that nerdy train. We have thankfully gotten a chance to get through all of our whiskey samples today, and I think we're going to revisit them as we ask a couple of other questions. So first, I want to ask about your still. As I understand, it's kind of an interesting story how you came by it.
Yeah, that's right. Good research or memory. So again, the times that we were in, I'll take people back on a little journey to a horrible land called pandemic. But when we were building the distillery, the pandemic hit. And again, if people will remember, there were tariffs going on and a different sort of world view happening. And then shipping was stopped. Whether or not you have a still made in China doesn't really matter. Most of the stainless steel that makes its way into the United States travels through China one way or another. And so without ships coming from China and without any idea of when that was going to open up again, we were forced to sort of hit the secondary market and try to figure out how can we get a still so that we can open this distillery that the feds and the state and our local hospital have said, open now. We want hand sanitizer, which is kind of crazy. But so we ended up finding a still posted on one of the distillers forums from a gentleman in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who had purchased this still, had it built for him, and then his project fell through in Baton Rouge. Shout out to him. He's a professor at LSU and was going to do this really cool spot, but the Historical Society voted it down. So he had this still sitting in storage for several years, still in the crates, never had been used. And he decided during the pandemic that I should get rid of this. Somebody else could probably use it. Fortunately for us, that somebody else was us. It was almost exactly what we were looking for. So we have a hybrid pot still. So it's got a pot with a small column on it that gets it the copper contact we wanted. And then we can turn on 2 columns side by side next to it to make the vodka and the gin. And yeah, we got it in. We had to do some modifications to make it fit in our building and some other, sort of do-it-yourself stuff. But again, another example of things working out partially because of the pandemic. So we ended up finding this great piece of equipment that our son, Keegan, will tell you he believes, no scientific reason behind this, but he believes that it imparts a house character to all of our spirits. And he'll tell you that he can identify any one of our spirits and a sort of a consistent flavor profile or house character. And he thinks it's because of that still.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised because, for example, the different barley bills, the different, even the different spirits, there's something that is a distillery character nevertheless. And considering that the still is kind of the only constant, I think.
Yeah.
I completely believe that as well.
Yeah.
Not to be too much of a nerd, but there's a long-standing tradition and superstition about stills in Scotland, for example, where you have places like Glenmorangie who have very tall, narrow stills where they get lots of copper contact, and early in their distillation process, it rises up and falls and rises and falls, and they say that gives them a cleaner, thinner spirit. And then you have distilleries like Lefroy that have slightly squatter stills that they say give them more of those phenols through to get the more unctuous peat notes. So there is 100%, if it's not real, it is real enough to be perceived an impact that stills make on the spirit.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have some efficiencies in the way we run or inefficiencies in the way we run our still. Just again, learning as new distillers and new folks in this space. If we were to redo some of our steam piping, we would do it a little bit differently and it would be more efficient. But that may also impact some of the character. Our inefficiency might be a benefit. We do distill slowly and methodically. We don't do the maximum we can do. So some of those things I think definitely add to the almost oily quality of a lot of our spirits. Distilling some from wine with the vodka and the gin and some of the liqueurs, that slow distillation and the way we do things definitely gives the vodka a much more of a coating mouthfeel and a bit of legs and some of the things you don't typically see if you're doing a different method of distilling or using a different type of still for it.
So the modifications that you had to do were of a practical nature. It had to fit in the building. But Was there a particular angle you were making on those modifications? I don't mean physically angle, but just in terms of like philosophy that was aiming at a certain style of spirit.
Not necessarily. I mean, we knew what we wanted to do, and we got our hands on the equipment that we could.
Mhm.
That was also part of the sort of, you just have to do what you have to do sometimes. And in the situation we were in, beggars couldn't be choosers about finding a still, or having one made. So it was more about the higher level thought process of, we knew we wanted to do our clear spirits and liqueurs wine based because we really love what that does. We really love a wine based vodka, wine based gin. We think it's special. It also makes a lot of sense for our area. There's a ton of wine grapes grown in California that are left to die on the vine, so just waste. There's a ton of wine that's finished, drain again, waste. So it just made sense, and these are good wines and great grapes. So that made a lot of sense for us. So that was one aspect, and then with the grains for the American single malt, we philosophically knew what we wanted to do, as far as mostly craft malt, working with smaller farms, getting as much character as we can. We try to use as little of the sort of standard distillers malts that are marketed out there because they don't have as much character. They're sometimes less expensive, but in the grand scheme of things, if you're buying a $60 bottle of whiskey and you're paying $1 more for supporting a craft maltster and a local farm, that makes a lot of sense. Like
Yep.
that's not a big difference. We're not talking about $100 versus $40 bottle. It's, it's a nominal difference at the end of the day. So it just makes sense to support that ecosystem. So back to the still, we generally knew what we needed to produce the kind of spirits we wanted to produce. But we were forced into not having a ton of input on shapes and functionality and sources and where it came from, just because of the times and what we had to do. But that probably was a real benefit as well, because we didn't have an opportunity to overthink it or overspend or over engineer or anything like that. We just had to do what we had to do. And maybe we got lucky, or maybe it's just maybe it's just fortuitous that the way things worked out for us. The real question becomes, as we scale, how do we capture what we've done and continue to do it? And so that's where we're at right now, is really thinking through that, and how do you continue to grow where there's demand. We're not in a position where we have to grow for any particular reason, but if people want to buy our spirits, we want to make them available. We don't want people to hear about this cool thing that they can't have. That's not fun. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how we do that. And I'm sure between the core group that we have, we'll definitely figure out how to do it. You've met Bonnie and had some time with her. We don't do anything unless it's passed sort of the test. And so, and then with Keegan and Alex on board and others, I'm sure we'll figure out the best way to do it. It might be a little bit painful to get there as we have conversations and stuff, but we'll figure it out. So.
Okay, so I want to ask an open-ended question now. So in your whole production process, what part of it is most is your geeky fixation? Like, what part of it could you think about and optimize to no end if you had the time?
Oh man, for me, it's probably working with botanicals. We have some spirits that we've done. We've got a Kräuter liqueur, which is, for people that don't know, it's a traditional German herbal liqueur. It's usually got dozens to 70 botanicals in it. Ours has 24. And I just love that balancing act and trying to figure it out. It's a puzzle. And it's really what started this whole obsession with spirits production for me, is having one in Germany, where my brother and his family live, and coming home and trying to figure out how in the world did they do that? It's got 24 botanicals in it. How did they figure out how much and how long and of which one? And so, started down that path. So I really love working with flavorings and botanicals and different things like that, just because it is so open-ended. I mean, it's a category where there's no expectations. And if you throw a name like Kräuterlikör on your product and serve it in a tasting room in Northern California, there are very few people who have any expectation of what that's going to taste like. So you really have this ultimate freedom to it. I also like, just generally, not on production, but I like building things. I like creating things. I like, in my former roles, I loved making programs and those sorts of things. So I like the process of growing this business as well, and figuring out a new business and figuring out, how do you do the tax reporting, and, maybe that's the HR guy in me, but, I like all that stuff. I like creating processes. I don't like doing processes, but, but I like creating them. And so, yeah, there's just so much meat on the bone in this industry of things you can geek out to and rabbit holes you can go down. Some of it is a little bit sad in that you have a timeline that you're never going to reach. It's also often spoken of very poetically, aging and things like that. But it's kind of sad to think that there are things that we're doing that, I or somebody else who might leave the company never gets to experience the process of how that thing happens, because that time is so long in some cases. That's kind of a piece that is very interesting to me on how things evolve. And then talking about that house flavor or the house style, does that evolve over time? And if it does, how does it? And is it intentional or not? Some of those things are really fascinating to think about.
Okay, so feel free to take a moment to brag on the rest of her portfolio if you'd like. So we've talked about that you have a vodka. We've talked about the Kräuterlikör, the beer schnapps, American single malt, of course, your sourced bourbon and rye. You've got a gin. Tell us a bit about the gin.
Yeah, so the gin is fun. It's the same base as the vodka, essentially. We do a little bit of a different distillation process on it. So it starts life as red wine, typically. Distill it into a high proof, clear spirit. Then we layer in botanicals that are native to the Sierra Nevada. So one of the things we've tried to do is limit ourselves as much as possible and as much as realistic to our area. I think that's one of the real benefits of craft distilling, is we can be regionalized and localized and really reflect where we're coming from. So by limiting our botanicals to only things that grow natively in our area in the Sierra Mountains, we don't have things that are pretty common like coriander and some of the other Far East things that you would find in gin. So we have, of course, juniper berries, because you have to. We have rose hips, elderflowers, ginger root, and gooseberries. So very kind of small botanical bill. But we've been very fortunate in all of our spirits. For whatever reason, our palates and our sensibilities have resonated with folks who make decisions about handing out awards and stuff like that. So we've been just very fortunate that that has occurred, and that people also seem to appreciate what we're about and what we're trying to do. And again, layering in this thing of what makes sense for where we're at in Northern California: wine, local botanicals, using local finishing barrels. The bourbon is a great example of that. We do all of our batches similar to this Discovery series. Each batch is drastically different. So it'll be a different distillery, a different mash bill. We finish in local wine barrels. huge advantage being 30 minutes from local wineries is we get to pick up those barrels the day that they're dumping them and transfer the bourbon into them the same day. They haven't been in a shipping container. They haven't made their way across the country. They haven't sat in a warehouse. They are fresh and wet still. And that's been fun. We've, again, in the spirit of experimentation, we've now done 14 different varietals of wine we finished in single varietals. So we don't do just a red wine finishing. We just bottled today. Our next batch will be coming out in several weeks. It's a Cinsault. It's a very unique grape, not usually used in a single varietal in wine. It's used in a blend. We've done Tannat and, of course, the standards, Pinot and Barbera and stuff. So it's been fun going down the path of pairing essentially a distillate with a wine variety and trying to figure out how to marry those and then how long to finish them and really impact it. And our bourbon is a bourbon that somebody who likes wine or port finishes will enjoy. If you don't like wine finishes, you're not going to like it because they're fresh wine barrels. It's a heavy wine influence when you get those fresh barrels like that. But yeah, I think all of it is just, we really try to be creative and sort of flex our creativity and we enjoy that. And so hopefully other folks do too. We're not trying to make the same product every time. And we try to be very clear because we don't want consumers to feel like they've been fooled or something when one batch tastes different to another. But what we're trying to do is make the batches distinct from each other.
All right, one more question, I think, just to wrap up. I haven't seen too many questions come in from the audience. Phil, I'm not sure if you have any questions, but let me know if you do. So I was curious to know, and you touched on this a little bit, sort of how you found your passion for spirits, because you were in a completely different industry. 20 years ago, I think you said that you had no inclination. It wasn't even on your radar that spirits could possibly be in your future. I can relate to that because 5 years ago, I had no idea that I would have a podcast that's in the spirits industry or adjacent to the spirits industry. You mentioned that you like Speyside Scotch, and you mentioned a couple of other spirits. I'm curious sort of how you came into spirits, into being a spirits enjoyer, and sort of what captured your attention, and maybe if different, what held your attention?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've always, I've been a big beer person. I really love beers. I love traditional Belgians and things like that. And I've tried making beer and it just, for whatever reason, didn't click for me and didn't capture me. It seemed like a lot of work for, in my case, inferior product when I could just go buy a really good beer from the experts. But it was completely different with spirits. When I got into spirits, again, it sort of started with that Kreutzer liqueur and diving down the rabbit hole on how is this thing made. And that just tumbled into books and reading and watching videos and just gobbling up as much information as I could about how spirits were made. Because I think I was like any other person who enjoyed whiskey. I didn't really know how it was made. I had never been to a distillery. And so, several year process of just diving into it and just being really interested in it. Like, I didn't know that. Wow, that's really interesting. And then there was a local, a couple hours away, distillery that was holding a gin making class. And I was like, oh, this is my opportunity to see the inside of a distillery. So went there and ended up befriending the head distiller and essentially begging him to let me come in during the week. And I promised I would help out however he needed help, if he needed the floors swept or whatever. And I just genuinely fell in love with the work, the process, the environment, the smells, everything about it. And that was really important for me, coming from a career that I really enjoyed, but feeling like my career had kind of peaked and there wasn't much that I was interested in doing in that career anymore, was to find something and make sure I actually enjoyed the day-to-day grind of it, because it sounds really cool to own a distillery, right? It sounds like, wow, this is awesome. How sexy and cool. But the reality is different than that. And I knew that going into it. So I really wanted to get the reality and understand, do I like doing this kind of work? Do I like, again, the cleaning, the all of the process stuff of it. And I love it. I love every minute of it. So yeah, it's been a cool journey that way. But yeah, it really just was out of this weird curiosity with how these things are done, and just kind of being fascinated with it. And then the idea to actually start the distillery was just kind of a realization that most people were like me. And if they are spirits people and drink spirits, even if it's just a vodka soda or whatever, they probably don't know as much about it as they would like to, and they might find it really interesting. So one of the things that was really important to us was to have a view into the production space. So some days I regret doing that. When people are tapping on the glass and you feel like an orangutan back there. But we have glass that's right up against the stills in our production space, because again, most people who come in have never, it might be their first distillery experience. So we really wanted to kind of show people what it was and what it is. And I think that's part of the excitement for me, is this area and this industry is just an area that's only going to grow in popularity as people become more and more exposed to the craft of it and what it really takes to make that bottle of Jack Daniels, or name your spirit.
All right. I remembered there's one more question. Sorry. Thank you for that answer.
No, you're good.
I'm just like, I'm so into it that I'm like, and I'm also doing the host thing where I'm like, okay, next question.
Yeah.
Right?
It's good.
Forget to thank you for your answers. Yeah.
I love answering questions.
So there was something I made a note to ask about later. But before I do that, Phil, you might remember that there's this bit that we keep forgetting to actually do, where we say, hey, we've got 2 samples in the glass, or maybe you finished your samples. But what we'd like to do is to blend whatever we have left in our glasses into one glass, and let it sit for a minute, and then sort of do some tasting notes on that before we get out of here. So I've got, batch 2, batch 3, put them together.
I'm going to add some of this Stranahan's to mine just to see
if
smoke comes out of it or what happens.
I also have a Stranahan, so we'll all have different results if we go this route. Maybe I'll just maybe so Phil and I can have something in common. I'll just have the batch 2, batch 3, and then I'll see what happens if I add the Stranahans later.
The fun thing is not with batch, but with many of our other batches is exactly the process we're going through. Batch 3 was a special distillation, special aging because of the partnership with the good folks at Dust Bowl. But our other ones, this is exactly what we would do. We've got varying mash bills or malt bills, aging and varying casks, and we figure out what goes with what. So I love this stuff. That's one of the things that we love about the single barrel program, is we do the same thing anybody else would do. We're tasting through barrels and we're like, wow, that single barrel's good. Let's put it out that way. So it's not a lot of science to it as far as, or magic. It's just anything any other whiskey geek would do. Right.
Yeah. I saw I don't know who it was, and I apologize, because I'd like to shout them out if I can remember. So I will later somewhere if I can find them. There was somebody who was doing like side-by-side reviews and then blending them together and doing a review of the blend. And I thought that was kind of a neat bit to put on social media, because everybody on social media is like, let's talk about this bottle, let's move on to the next bottle of the week. And I mean, I'm guilty, right? There's a little bit of that, and talking up the products that we like is of course our priority as people who are enthusiasts and stuff. But like, one of the cool things that enthusiasts do is they screw around.
Yeah.
I've got a barrel over there that's been aging a rum. It's a 2-liter barrel, and it's been aging a rum for a year and a half.
Yeah.
The last time I had it tested, which was like 6 months ago, it was 83% alcohol. So yeah, that's the kind of wild stuff that we as enthusiasts do. And you know, it's kind of a fun thing to just do a little blend. The first blend in the glass I ever did, I had Ardbeg 10, and I wanted to know whether I would like Ardbeg Ugadal. So I said, it's a sherried Ardbeg. Let's just grab a sherry and put like 5 milliliters into my 45 milliliters of Ardbeg 10 and see what that tastes like. And
Yeah.
I really liked that. It's
Yeah,
like, it's blasphemy
absolutely.
in a way, and Ugadal is completely different than that, right? So I did not achieve the result, but the direction of taking that heavily peated swampy thing and giving it some sweet wine influence and saying I really like that. That's how I discovered sherried heavily peated Scotch. So it worked out.
Well, and that's the cool thing about the spirit space right now is it has been very not craft, right? But we're talking about when you go to your average store, looking at the average shelf, there's a handful of products on there. There's not like a ton of products that are blends of rum and rye and bourbon with a little bit of port added in. There's not this crazy creativity. The beer world has gotten there, right? You go to the beer section and you've got every imaginable thing plus 100. But one of the exciting things that just like I love about this space is there's so much room for creativity and innovation, and some of it will be great and some of it will be not so great. But there's no wrong answers, and yeah, throw in some sherry in your, why not? Why not blend? I don't know, whatever you want. Like, just have fun with it. If it doesn't work, pour it out, and
Yeah, or I don't know, find a cocktail, like keep building.
yes.
Right, there's only one time that hasn't worked for me. I have a Baijiu, not a great Baijiu. It's a Red Star Ergoto, basically the cheapest thing you can buy, almost the cheapest thing you can buy. There are worse. Just because my wife wanted to have some to marinate some shrimp with some recipe that she had. It's like, you have to put Baijiu in. Don't use this Baijiu. It doesn't work for that. Rum was better. But so I was like, I have this Baijiu, a whole bottle of it. I don't particularly like it. It's okay as a sipper in the sense that it's interesting. But this is a case where I say it's not very high quality, and it has off notes.
Yeah.
But it also has some interesting things. It's got some herbal stuff, a little bit like a vermouth. It's got some honey. There's flavors in there that seem like something you can work with. So every once in a while, I'll be like, I'm open to drinking anything. Let's try to build a cocktail around this Baijiu. And there was one day where I'm like, okay, let's add some vermouth. Let's make like a Manhattan. Let's just start with like a Manhattan, but we substitute the base and sort of go from there. That was terrible. Let's see if I can fix it by adding any other ingredients. And everything I added to it, it just got worse and worse. I couldn't bury it. It was just a demon, and I had to pour it out. Literally could not drink it.
Yeah.
And in any of its iterations, right? It wasn't like I had something okay that I could have drank and I made it worse. It was intolerable, and I was hoping I could make it better, and it never got there.
Yeah. Yeah, we've only had in the distillery, in the professional aspect, we've only had a handful of times where we've had something similar happen. We had a tote of wine that was delivered to us that was just not right, and we couldn't figure out anything to do with it that would not end up with some horrible off notes. But other than that, we've been very fortunate that the partners we work with are wonderful, and the raw ingredients are awesome. We're spoiled where we're at and what we have surrounding us. So.
Okay, so before we get into tasting notes on this blend that we've done, I did have this one thing to ask you about. You said there was a caveat. You had this experiment where the only difference was that they were one grain and another grain. And then you said, but there's a caveat you'll tell us about later. So
yeah, that's the open fermentation.
Okay,
so
it was the open fermentation. Okay.
Yep. So we don't have complete control over that. We have no control over that. And
Gotcha.
so that's going to be, something that's going to vary from season to season. And again, thinking about time, and maybe I'm just getting old or something, but this concept of time, there's only so many seasons and so many iterations of what we can do, and so will any one person really know how the seasons are impacting us, and what is it about that season? Is it that the pollen came early on the pine trees that surround the distillery? again, and I'm sure there are scientists who could tell you, yes, it's this, it's that, it's this, and you need to measure it. But there's something romantic about also not measuring it and just getting on with the work we have to do.
It's alchemy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's,
Indeed.
again, it's terroir, you know, there's that word is thrown around a lot, but nobody can produce opening the garage doors in Arnold, California, and letting the outside in. Nobody can reproduce that. It's going to be us and us alone until somebody else moves here and starts a distillery or whatever. But you know, for all intents and purposes, it's us. And so that's a flavor that we have that you know can't be replicated. And when you multiply that out to every decision you make, trying to make the most local decision you can, that's going to give us a footprint of where we're from, no matter where you're drinking this thing. Hopefully you envision being here or what it might be like. Same thing as when we have a glass from somebody from in Colorado or down south or overseas, wherever it is. Hopefully you reflect where you're coming from. And you know, we're not trying to be anybody we're not. So
very well said.
thank you.
I mean, you know, this concept of like mash bills, like some people keep their mash bills a secret, like somebody's going to replicate that. There's so many small factors like what you just listed. Open fermentation is a huge one that can't be controlled, but that's the unbridled fire that even you're just rolling with it, right? It's the not trying to replicate. But just think about all of these, you know, your brewery partnership and the places that you're getting all of your different malts from. It's not just the recipe, it's the partnerships that it takes to get that recipe.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of legwork that goes into that, and somebody could try to replicate that, but you're going to be far beyond that by the time they come up with, you know, their version of the same product, probably inferior, just because whenever you try to imitate something, you're imitating. You're not doing something that's really authentic. Authenticity is huge.
Yeah, and I think this idea of copying or whatever, you know, I got over that when we worked when I was at Tesla, and Elon released all of the patents for the public of everything. So he's like, he wants electric cars to be, you know, at this time to be the thing. How do I do that? I let everybody else have the technology. Our advantage is going to be in the way we design things, the way we, you know, whatever it is, right? You can layer on the same kind of theory to what we're all doing. The reason people buy our product versus somebody else, there's a lot of decisions that go into that, but a lot of it's visceral in the way they feel about it. And the first experience with it is the way it looks. You know, sometimes that gets ignored. It's got to be an experience from the very first moment all the way through. And hopefully when they taste it and experience it with their friends and family, that's a good thing. And they feel good about it and they come back to it. But there's so much more involved than what the actual juice in the bottle tastes like. It could be the same bottle, same juice, different experience. You're around different people and you feel differently about it. You might, you know, tequila is a great example. Many people have had a bad experience on tequila and they hate tequila. That doesn't mean that tequila is bad, you know, or what have you, but you know what I'm saying? So there's this, this kind of like magical thing that happens when you discover a product you enjoy, or have an experience you enjoy and you relate to other things. So the fact that somebody could look at the back of the bottle and replicate exactly what we're doing is kind of irrelevant. And you know, I don't know that anybody would want to do that, first of all, but even if they did, that's fine. It's okay. I mean, we did it because we think it tastes good. So maybe you want to make more of it. That's cool.
Agreed. Nowhere to go from there except to taste our blends and
Yes.
sort of
Hear
get
me
out
out,
of here.
Doug.
So yeah.
Butter on toasted sourdough bread.
Butter on toasted sourdough.
I'll take that and raise you. The bread is a cinnamon raisin bread.
Oh wow. The number 3 puts a lot of cinnamon in there, I feel like.
Yeah.
And it's not like spicy cinnamon. It's almost like maybe with the sweetness of the other one. Like, I don't know if your guys' family did this, but like buttered toast, just white toast or potato bread with that cinnamon sugar on top. Yeah. It's that kind of cinnamon, like the sweet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that buttery thing is really cool. I was expecting, when I first did the blend, I think it acted up a bit and then it calmed down. But I was expecting, so for me, the first time I tasted batch 3, the biggest note that came out at me was actually like espresso grounds.
Yeah. And that's what Phil said with kind of the roasted coffee, the beginning part of roasting coffee. Yep.
Yeah, and like the more I dig into it, the harder it is for me to find that coffee again, weirdly. And when I did the blend, the coffee popped right back out, but then it sort of went back down.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting.
Yeah. And like I said, I think there's something to approaching problems from the outside that, again, if we were industry veterans who had the education to know, we would be able to tell you that the butter flavor comes from this piece of the fermentation, which we have learned some of these things. But I feel like when you know too much, sometimes you can over engineer things and miss out on some great things, or maybe you've been taught that is bad, right? That if this happens in your fermentation and you get this off flavor, it's bad. But maybe my palate likes that off flavor, or whatever it is. So it's fun, the experiment of it. The challenge will be for us to come up with a standard product, the American single malt whiskey, and try to keep it consistent. But maybe we don't. I don't know. It's, choose your own adventure, right?
Yeah. I mean, Copperworks just only earlier this year, after many years in operation, went from their "it's always a different batch, it's the best of what we have, the thing we want to make right now," to a trio of products that they intend to continue making, so they have the fixed SKUs.
Yeah.
And that's coming from a desire to grow and be on more store shelves and et cetera. But as much as anything, it's just the fact that they've gotten big enough now that it's worth it for them to dial in a formulation.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I think, I don't know that they've said as much, but, and disclaimer, I'm an investor in Copperworks. So,
yeah, no, I could see it. I could see the reasoning behind it. I could see the, again, just practical reasons. Like, if you dial in your malt bill, you're buying more of those malts, which means you're getting a better price point, right? So if I'm constantly changing what I'm buying very small amounts, and paying the highest price. So there's a lot of real reasons to figure your stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, at the same time, I think there's definitely a market too for innovation and change and varying batches. And I just think that there are people out there who are enjoying discovering flavors in a world that used to be just Jack Daniels and Jim Beam, and now you've got a lot of creative stuff happening on the shelves. Even if it's just Angel's Envy aging stuff in wine barrels. Like, to me, 20 years ago when I started drinking whiskey, that was not there, right? It was, what do you drink? Oh, I drink Jack Daniels, or I'm a Kessler man, or whatever, So there's just a lot of creativity, and I love seeing how craft has pushed the big guys into doing Oloroso finishes and, just other things. They're trying also to appeal to what consumers want. They want, some new stuff happening and some new flavors, and there's a wide world out there. So it's pretty fun.
On that note, I think it's about time for us to wrap up and cheers out of here. Normally I say everybody raise a glass of what their favorite glass was of the evening, but since we've all blended our glasses together, I may just ask you, maybe I shouldn't poke that bear. Maybe we'll leave it as an open-ended question. Hey, check out our reviews, because Phil and I both post reviews on occasion, and I'm trying to do more. So keep an eye out. You'll see our reviews of these products coming soon. So on the note of cheersing to get out of here, I think the story of today has all been about innovation, but also embracing the chaos. So here's to embracing the chaos.
Yes, a good time for that. Cheers.
So Nate, it's been great to have you on. Thank you for your time. We know it's super valuable. It's been great having you on and talking to you. And without further ado, cheers. And until next time, we'll see you in the lodge. Good night.
Sláinte.
Cheers.